finally, policy and regulation consideration for open RAN. No, actually, we needed to have that background of the policy and regulatory environment. Kasi unless a new law is passed, then nothing from what I've told you would change. So, for example, a Republic Act that says that a congressional franchise is necessary to build a mobile network cannot be superseded by, let's say, the NTC just deciding to say na, oh, you don't need a congressional franchise anymore. May hierarchy kasi yan. The hierarchy is the Constitution, the highest law of the land, a Republic Act by Congress, then an executive order, and then the department issuances and memorandum circulars. So that's why it's important to recognize and be aware of the general frameworks first. Okay. So given the Philippines a policy and regulatory environment, what would be the considerations for Open RAN? Okay. Telecom policy and regulation were developed, they were designed for analog telecom services. And when I say analog telecom services, we're talking of your landline, because that's what the basis of RA 7925 was. That's your local exchange carrier service, fixed landline telephone, and analog mobile radio services. That's why regulation needs to be updated to promote Open RAN. Actually, yung description pa lang ng Open RAN, sobrang ng high-tech, di ba? Parang how can you possibly put Open RAN in the context of a very analog era policy framework? So what do we need to do? Well, and I'm not just saying this. This is the result of the recommendation of various studies, including the World Bank, the PIDS, even the ADB, and UP, various studies. First, we need to simplify the licensing requirement for building and operating a network to follow global practice, which is a license comes from a ministry or department of ICT or the industry regulator. It's actually an administrative process coming from the executive agency if they had it. So let's get rid of the political process because licensing is a very technical function. The congressional franchise must be removed and the licensing be fully delegated to the NTC. Spectrum licensing must also be updated. Again, removing the franchise kasi again, spectrum licensing also involves or requires the franchise. Open RAN can actually be more easily propagated by allowing non-PTEs. Kasi pag PTE, may franchise. Basically, non-enfranchised entities to pilot test the technology and the standard. So, by doing that, you can also do regional assignment and sharing of spectrum unutilized in certain areas so that you can democratize access to Open RAN by community networks. So, in areas where Open RAN is, in areas where we have redundant connectivity, I guess it's easy because the enfranchised telcos are already here, like the highly urbanized areas. But in the unserved and unserved areas, underserved and unserved, where most of the time the big telcos are not present, there are non-telco service providers who can actually be tapped for this. So if the franchise cannot be removed in the immediate term, NTC can perhaps ease restrictions on some permits. For example, yung mga demo permit. Kasi ang demo naman, it's not yet a commercial deployment. It's just a testing stage. So, if you review the radio control law, there is nothing there naman that says to demonstrate a wireless tech, you need a congressional franchise na. Remember that the telecom service or a mobile radio service is offering the service to the public for a fee. So a demo is not yet at that stage. So the NTC needs to also assess Open RAN equipment, so type approval is very important. But then now the NTC has to grapple with a multiple vendor environment. Um, so the hardware would be different, and the RAN can also, since it can also be virtualized software based siya, then the NTC also needs to assess what kind of approval is necessary for such a configuration. Okay. Since Open RAN is a mobile standard, so spectrum should be made available. Securing sufficient spectrum for Open RAN deployment could be very challenging, particularly for new entrants or smaller operators. If you recall, in 2018, there was a third telco selection process. I was fortunate enough to be a part of that. I was the civil society representative that observed the selection process at the NTC. And many opinion came out of, you know, because of that selection process. But one of the things that stood out was that the Philippine Competition Commission at the time said that insufficient frequencies for mobile actually, in certain bands, discourage the entry of new players. Kumbaga, as I mentioned earlier, when you're an investor, you need predictability, you need a stable environment, and you need to make sure, you need to know that there is sufficient resources available to you when you want to invest here. So right now, actually, even outside of the issue of Open RAN, if another mobile network operator would want to enter the market, it would be very difficult because of the lack of mobile frequency. Exclusive assignment of spectrum on a nationwide basis to just one entity might also prevent new players or other smaller players from taking advantage of Open RAN or offering it as a service, or actually even on a trial basis in certain communities, because you need spectrum to demonstrate and you need the permit for that. So lagi siyang nakakabit sa franchise. That is very limiting. To make more spectrum available, spectrum sharing could be done, perhaps on a regional basis. We don't have a spectrum sharing policy except for one memorandum circular on TV white space. Also another emerging technology. But that spectrum sharing is only limited to the ICT. And it's limited to VHF, which is actually more scarce than UHF sana. But that's another issue. Okay. Open RAN deployment may require significant investment in infrastructure, so including the RAN, backhaul, and network management systems. RA 7925 contains the national policy for telecoms, and it has put the primary role for offering telecom services to the private sector. Privatized ang telecom sector in the Philippines. That is why the government does not really play a big role, except to fill some gaps. The government, so as a result, the government might not be too keen on allocating public funds for Open RAN deployment, given that the budget for, let's say, the ICT, for example, is focused on its national flagship programs, such as the National Fiber Backbone or the Free Wi-Fi and other digitalization projects. So public funding for emerging standards might be very limited. However, special financing mechanisms could be considered. Example would be the Strategic Investment Priority Plan, or SIPP, and also some PPP, or public-private partnership mechanisms. Just a side note, my personal view, public spending in digital infra, if you look at history, has not really shown much success. So like any standard, like other tech standards, market investment and demand is actually the key to a successful deployment for any standard, including Open RAN. Okay. In terms of interoperability and standards, there are challenges in terms of aligning technology specs, addressing interoperability issues, and effective coordination because of the multi-vendor deployment. In this case, the NTC would be the primary actor because of its mandate for setting standards and ensuring interoperability. So, but bear in mind that the Philippines, well, the standards that we adhere to is actually those from international organizations to which the Philippines is signatory. Okay. Siguro let's check what we know. Is Open RAN equipment commercially available? Yes, but they all need NTC type approval. Is Open RAN commercially deployed by our local telcos? No, it's still at the proof of concept stage. And this needs approval from the NTC in terms of demo. But the demo permit needs a telco endorsement. How can Open RAN become a standard? Right now, industry and academia can become a member of the ORAN Alliance and participate in defining Open RAN requirements and specifications. This actually doesn't need government approval, so anyone from the industry and the academia can participate. How does the Philippines adopt a mobile telecom standard? As I mentioned earlier, we're a member state of the ITU, and we actually, the government on our behalf, signs international and executive agreements with the ITU and other global standards body. So, like any new standard, Open RAN requires training and skills development for engineers, technicians, and other personnel. But bear in mind that the human resource challenge is not really huge for the private sector. It's actually bigger for the industry regulator. Kasi adopting new tech, looking at a new business model, new standards, etc., is actually on the regulator. So the NTC must undergo relevant training and upskilling to deal with new requirements and challenges of a multi-vendor mobile market. But since the DICT is the policy-making body, it also needs to undergo training and skills, capacity building, and other agencies that need to deal with Open RAN, such as the National Privacy Commission for data privacy concerns, and other agencies that might need to look into this would be the Philippine Competition Commission, because vendor lock-in, for example, is anti-competitive, and that needs to be prevented so the PCC can come in. So the diverse and competitive vendor ecosystem as a result of Open RAN will now need to be understood by all these government agencies, and that would take time and effort.